This is the Dollemore Daily, and I'm Jesse Dollemore. In Republican political circles, all that it takes to be a rock star is to perform well on television for that audience of one, Donald Trump, or to say out loud in an interview the most ludicrous and idiotic thing that pops into your bootlicking brain that also happens to run counter to all reason, evidence, and facts on hand. Because Trump has transformed an already dying Republican Party into one that exists seemingly based on the volume of the most fantastical and ridiculous positions that can be asserted as quickly as possible. And Donald Trump's impeachment and now trial in the Senate is a prime example of this. If you don't believe me, listen to friend of and defender of Jeffrey Epstein, who is now an official member of Donald Trump's impeachment defense team, Alan Dershowitz. Listen to him make the most tragically Republican argument related to Donald Trump and his possible removal from office via the Senate trial that you may ever hear.
Is it your position that President Trump should not be impeached, even if all the evidence and arguments laid out by the House are accepted as fact?
That's right. When you have somebody who, for example, is indicted for a crime, let's assume you have a lot of evidence, but the grand jury simply indicts for something that's not a crime, and that's what happened here. You have a lot of evidence, disputed evidence, could go both ways, but the vote was to impeach on abuse of power, which is not within the constitutional criteria for impeachment, and obstruction of Congress. Those are both the kinds of things that led Hamilton and Madison, talk about nightmare, to regard that as the greatest nightmare. Number one, giving Congress too much power to allow the president to serve at the will of Congress. And number two, as Hamilton put it, the greatest danger is turning impeachment into a question of who has the most votes in which house. And rather than having a consensus and a broad view of impeachable conduct.
Stunning. Simply stunning. George Stephanopoulos asked him, is it your position that Donald Trump should not be impeached even if all the evidence and arguments laid out by the House are accepted as fact? And Alan Dershowitz sits there like the disgrace he is and says, somehow, with a straight face, that's right. You know, I wish there was a way to conjure events from a completely different universe. A universe in which Alan Dershowitz argued the exact same issue from the exact opposite position. If only there were video and audio from that completely different universe. Wouldn't that be great?
It certainly doesn't have to be a crime. If you have somebody who completely corrupts the office of president and who abuses trust and who poses great danger to our liberty, you don't need a technical crime. But remember that because the executive power is vested in one person, the president, unlike the judicial power, which is vested in justices of the Supreme Court and inferior judges, or the legislative power in 100 senators and 400 and something representatives, we have one president. And to impeach a president is like a nonviolent revolution. It is the most dramatic act of undoing democracy that is possible, and that's why the framers use the term treason, bribery, high crimes and misdemeanors to suggest the English analogy to great offenses of state. We look at their acts of state. We look at how they conduct the foreign policy. We look at whether they try to subvert the Constitution the way Iran-Contra did by going behind the back of Congress, by lying repeatedly.
Look, in any other age of American history, you would need this to be a Saturday Night Live sketch for it to be believed that that was actually broadcast on national TV. But it wasn't. This was merely another member of Trump's band of gaslighting, ass-kissing troglodytes spewing more nonsense into the ether in an attempt to weaken the public's will and resolve to resist. Here's another case of when morons attack. Senator John Cornyn of Texas. And look, I already know that even by Republican standards, John Cornyn isn't the smartest guy. I know that. And I know that many believe him to be cripplingly daft and unfit to serve the great state of Texas in any capacity whatsoever. But here he is, in the United States Senate, defending Trump the best he knows how. In fact, he was on Face the Nation over the weekend and was asked about Rudy Giuliani, and two things stood out to me. First was this exchange about Trump associate Lev Parnas.
Well, I would be careful before crediting the veracity of somebody who is under indictment in New York, the Southern District of New York, and who's trying to get leniency from the prosecutor and who has ties to Russian oligarchs.
Well,
the Russians
exactly,
have had a lot to do with our elections and disinformation campaigns, and this could be part of that.
And you certainly would have knowledge since you're on Senate intelligence on that. But given what you're saying are Lev Parnas' ties to Russian oligarchs, which is often shorthand for Russian mafia, doesn't it trouble you that he was working so closely with Rudy Giuliani, who was acting on the president's behalf and saying he was acting on the president's behalf?
Well, there's no question that there have been a series of grifters and other hangers-on that have associated themselves with the president's campaign or claim to have special relationships with the president. But this is not the issue that the Senate's going to be deciding. We'll take the issue of evidence as it comes. If the impeachment managers want to rest their case on the credibility of somebody who's under indictment in the Southern District of New York with extensive ties to Russian oligarchs and organized crime, as you point out, then that's their choice.
One, he didn't even answer the question. In fact, he just dug a hole even deeper than he had. He brings up how skeevy Lev Parnas is, and look, to be sure, Lev Parnas is skeevy. And she says, and I'm paraphrasing, well, if he's so slimy and dirty, why is he so damn close to Giuliani and the President of the United States? And then, rather than answering, baby brain Cornyn just repeats that Parnas is a scumbag. So, no answer? Got it. Next, in the very same interview, Senator Cornyn really amps up what passes for Republican reason in the age of Trump. Watch what he asserts when asked, as a juror hearing evidence in the trial of Donald Trump in the Senate, about whether he has any questions for Rudy Giuliani about all of this.
Environment in Ukraine and Russia.
Do you have questions for Rudy Giuliani about any of this?
Not relative to the impeachment. I just, that's a relationship that causes many of us to sort of scratch our heads. But I'd say he's not relevant to the articles and what the Senate's going to be asked to do, impeaching a president for the third time in American history for a non-crime over events that never occurred.
Senator Cornyn, thank you.
So this animated turd says Rudy Giuliani isn't relevant to Trump's impeachment trial. The same Rudy Giuliani who was Donald Trump's personal attorney. The very same Rudy Giuliani who is at the very core of all of this, who played a central role in trying to convince Ukraine to interfere in our upcoming 2020 election by investigating Donald Trump's political rival. That's not relevant to the Senate impeachment trial, apparently. This is in the face of insane evidence like this letter, written by not relevant Rudy to President Zelensky of Ukraine, in which Rudy says, among other things, quote, "In my capacity as personal counsel to President Trump and with his knowledge and consent, I request a meeting with you on this upcoming Monday, May 13th, or Tuesday, May 14th. But nothing to see here, folks. Move along. Because in the Republican Party, up is down. White is black. Dumb is smart. And lies are truth. I mean, why would a fact finder, a truth seeker, want to ask any questions of Donald Trump's own personal agent who was directly involved in the very matters that led to his impeachment? That would be absurd, right? Only absurd, in fact, if one was trying to obscure the truth of the matter at hand, rather than to have the disinfectant power of the light of day purify this situation by revealing all the sordid details to the public through the Senate impeachment trial. And this leads us back to where we were in the beginning of this a few minutes ago, talking about the bizarro nature of the Republican Party, the party of lies and deceit and contempt for the intelligence of the American electorate. And while there is certainly a vast sea of MAGA hats out there who revel in their ignorant bliss like some kind of Dunning-Kruger feature film, My guess is that more Americans than not want to get back to a time when truth was honored and facts were respected. And the best way, I think, to force that change upon the other side is at the ballot box this November. Look, individually, our votes don't move the needle all that much, but together we can make sweeping change that will send these liars packing, and packing for good.